Hello, readers. Today's book review is going to be a little more interesting than normal. I'm going to start by letting you know that this book is for the young adult crowd. So if you've been listening with younger readers, this episode is going to have some older themes, and I want you to be aware. It's a fantasy book with what I can only imagine as the young adult version of Thumbelina meets Game of Thrones. I'm only slightly aware of that latter series, as what I've heard about it makes me wary of reading it. But the general concept of vying powers, garnering influence for a chance at the throne, or in this case, the crown, is what this book is all about. The Cruel Prince by Holly Black is a popular young adult fantasy book and is the first in a growing series. At least, I think it's still going. It's a fantasy, and I feel the need to define what types of fantasies there are here. There is high fantasy, a world completely different from our own. The opposite of that is low fantasy, where magic takes place in our world, but we're unaware of it. Finally, there's magical realism, and it's another term to describe fantasy that is where magic is a natural occurrence for all people, and they're usually aware of it in their everyday lives, but it's in our world. Like an alternate realities kind of thing. But this is a low fantasy. Since most of the book takes place in a magical realm, it feels like a high fantasy. First off, let me say that it'll be hard to summarize this story into digestible bites without giving some of the major spoilers. It starts off with a bang, almost enough to make me put the book down and not review it at all. But I decided to push through. I will say, I'm glad I did, because I did enjoy the story, but it was unsettling at times nonetheless. This is a violent story about a family who is part human and part fae, or fair folk. They live in the fae world, but are obviously not from it and do not fit in. The fae are odd, to say the least. They're pretty much able to get away with anything they want, while humans are often, let's say, over enamored with them, doing their every bidding. This follows darker fairy tale storylines, where fairies are tricksy and cruel, especially to humans. All the while, this family is close to the royal family of the fair folk, and several members are hated all the more for their position. These members must protect themselves from the enchanting presence of the fairies in many different ways, but as the story progresses, it gets more difficult to do so. It focuses on one member in particular and her many struggles to live in the fairy world. Okay, I think I've summarized it vaguely enough, but hopefully leaving enough enticement to read without disclosing too many things. Again, it really does start off with a bang. I read this in 2 or 3 nights because I kind of got hooked. So, this is a book for older teens. The characters are far more diverse and complex than in some of the other books I've read. Let me start with the family, and then maybe we'll get to some of the other characters because there's a lot of people to know. The main character is a girl named Jude. She is fully human. We first meet her when she's really young, about 7 years old, but the story takes place when she is 17, 10 years later. She is headstrong and quite capable. She is determined to get in positions of power because she feels powerless in the land of fairies. She loves fairyland and is determined to make her way in that world. Taryn is June's twin sister. She is the exact opposite of Jude in every way possible, except that she also is quite fond of fairyland. Vivian, who's also called Vivi, is their older sister. She is half human, half fairy. She cannot be controlled like a human, but can pass as either a fairy in the fairyland or as a human in our world. But she hates the world of fairies and everything about it. General Madoc is Vivian's biological father and Jude and Taryn's adoptive father. He is both harsh and loving, tender and cruel. It's a tempestuous relationship they all have with him, but there's a kind of endearing love Jude has for him. Oriana is their stepmother. She's kind of frantic about everything all the time. And then there's Oak. He's Madoc and Oriana's son. He's 6 and acts like a 6-year-old boy. He's described as sickly, but we do not really see much of that in the book. Okay, so I think we got time for some non-family members. And there's a few important ones to keep track of. There's the king, though he's hardly featured, but he is important. He really only makes an appearance in 1 or 2 scenes, but several of his children are important, and his whole family line is important. Prince Dane is the 3rd oldest child of the king, and is rumored to be the heir of the crown. Prince Baelkin is the oldest child of the king, and he has some dark rumors circulating about him. Prince Cardan is the youngest child, and has an equally bad reputation as Baelkin. He goes to school with Jude and Taryn, and is the bane of Jude's existence. There are other royal family members, other siblings, the sisters, but they're not often mentioned in the story, even less than the king. Cardan also has some friends who are as equally cruel as he is. Oh, he is the cruel prince. It alludes to this on the back of the book, so I don't really feel like I'm spoiling anything here. But his friends, Nicasia, Valerian, and Locke, are mostly pretty horrible, though one of them seems to sort of come around. They all cause trouble for Jude, who often defies them. Again, this is on the back of the book, so I'm not spoiling anything. When I was writing the summary, I thought this would be a difficult series to talk about without spoilers. But now doing the analysis, it's a whole new ball game of difficult. I'm going to let you know about a couple of scenes here which I feel I must fill you in on some detail. And if you've listened so far, I want to let you know I'm not certain I would recommend this book to someone. There are shows and books that I enjoy and let people know I enjoyed that. But I can't say I'd recommend them all the time. Sometimes this is because there are inappropriate jokes or language in them, and it's so pervasive that it's somewhat uncomfortable. Sometimes it's because it's violent and the violence of the book or the movie is just too much. Sometimes this is because it's too sensualized to the point of being uncomfortable. I'm not even talking about nudity or sexual acts. That's off the table. It's just too much sensuality. This book is kind of like that. So I'm going to let you know exactly what they are. But let me say, none of it is praised in the book. It's just a part of the world they live in. And the reality is, it sucks for every character. So the one major theme in this book is power and how to obtain it. Mostly to stop feeling powerless. I'm not sure if Holly Black is commenting on the negativity of all this, but throughout the book, the steps to get power have some serious side effects. This is a young adult book, so another major theme is romantic interest. The romantic exploits of the characters are fickle at best, but sometimes a little over-sensualized. This book is for older readers, both in content and writing style. It's not quite a diary, but it is a story told by Jude, not just from her perspective. It's mostly written in the first-person perspective, though at some point, Jude keeps us in the dark about some of the things she is thinking or doing. This writing style, content, and context all put this book at 16-year-old for a reader. I have seen some reviews for this book for a much younger audience, but because of everything I'm going to tell you about, I believe it's for a much older audience. Again, I wouldn't say I recommend it for a 16-year-old, but I wouldn't let someone younger than 16 read it. The plot is intriguing. It keeps the reader engaged and hooked to the story. Holly Black is a great writer, captivating the imagination of her readers. But it is a weaving, twisting tale, one that is hard to follow for younger readers. The more mature content all plays a significant role in the plot. There are some books you can just skip past certain mature themes and it would have no impact on the book. They're just cheap thrills thrown in, and in all my years of reading, I can't discern why. But not with this book. Holly uses these things to tell the story. This is not going to be your cut and dry gospel conversation. There may be one redeemable quality in this book: the protection of someone from the world of the fairies so they won't be influenced by them, spurred by Jew herself. But that's about it. It doesn't make the story bad, and I'm not going to judge the story based on one book. It could be that within the larger context of the story, of the series, there are more redeemable things that are going to occur. Who knows? I haven't read the rest of the series yet, and I do mean yet. So let me mention briefly what may be a second redeemable fact. The book doesn't speak positively of any of the negative things happening in Fairyland. I'm not trying to justify these things in the book. I'm just here to explain what they are. I will say the Bible often shows us many terrible situations and things about our humanness, our sinful nature. It doesn't shy away from their negative impacts. This book resonates with that sentiment. It's not shying away from it, and it makes significant strides to show the negative results of these stories. So here are the negative things, and they are a bit of a spoiler alert. Brutal, cold-blooded murders happen in this book. I wouldn't say frequently, but often enough that the characters are desensitized to them. There are at least 5 scenes that show this kind of murder, and there's one stabbing scene and one killing that is in self-defense from a rather disturbing attack. There's also a cold-blooded assassination that happens. Besides all of this, the book is just kind of violent. Almost again, uncomfortably so. There is also a same-sex attracted character. There's nothing written that's sexual about the relationship, but it can be assumed from the context that sex is happening. This may be one point of contention with the Bible that doesn't speak of these relationships in the same way as the Bible. The outlook is rather positive in the story, but the Bible only speaks positively of one romantic and sexual relationship: marriage between one man and one woman. Nothing else is positively spoken about, though they're often written in the Bible. This relationship is also kept hidden from many people in the story because of a singularly odd, conservative nature of some of the characters, though Jude is aware of this relationship. Then there are the fairies. There's not much redeemable about them. Most of them are violent, cruel, and perverse. They are the darker nature of humanity. All of it. They took and embodied that darker human nature. This world isn't quite like I would imagine Sodom and Gomorrah to have been, but it isn't far off either. First of all, the fairies are racist in the story. Not against different coloring of skin. They all have different colors and tinges of skin, but they hate the human race, and they make sure humans know it. They enamor, or what the book calls glamour, humans. Basically, they drug them. Then they make them do whatever they want. Slavery, eating weird or poisonous things, or sexually exploiting them. There is one scene where a glamoured human is made to take her clothes off. She's wearing underwear, and one fairy stands up against it before things get too out of hand. Again, almost closed the book here, but it came just to the edge of that uncomfortableness. Then the fairies party like it's 1999. They drink, take substances like drugs, and are described often enough as waking up in twisted and sprawled out limbs in places all over houses and other locations. I don't think I need to paint the picture of what happened. But again, it's seen as a negative to the fairiness. It isn't viewed positively by June or many others in the world. It's just the world she finds herself in, which I think can be the saving grace of this book. Besides all this, there's a bit of cursing in the book. Not a ton, but it's there. They are some of my least favorite words as the cursing vernacular goes. In many ways, Jude wants to be a part of the fairy world. She wants to earn her place there. But she's torn because she sees all this negativity. She also wants to make the world better. I believe this may be unintentional, but Holly Black may have just written a book about the conquering nature of sin. If we're all honest, we both hate and love our sins. If we didn't, wouldn't it be easy to just stop sinning once and for all? But it just isn't that easy this side of heaven. This is the opposite book of Pilgrim's Progress, showing us the darker side of humanity and the destruction it can bring to our lives. Again, the only redeeming point being the fact that to save someone from the darkness, they have to be taken out of it. Socially, this book has many political implications. There's obviously the king's court and the many positions of power within it. This can be seen in every political power in the world. And while the world isn't necessarily killing each other for the positions of power, they are vying over them in the same destructive force. Then there's romance. Oh man, is it bad? Not bad as in like there's too much of it, but bad and just it's so broken. It's heartbreaking to read. But I am sure that these types of relationships happen. In one instance, a character is playing games between two other romantic interests, purposely creating chaos between them, because this character simply likes chaos. It's really saddening. And again, we see the cracks and darkness of the situation as it stands. There is so much about this book, though in a fairy world that reflects the dark side of human nature, drugs, alcoholism, and the elevation of sex and so on, makes it so this book could be seen as a social commentary on the destructive ways these things are used in our world. I'm not sure if that was the intended storyline, but it can be argued as such. Overall, as I said before, I enjoyed the book. I feel as if it were a digestible Game of Thrones for someone like me, who was always interested in those books but never really wanted to read them. But also, I feel I can't recommend it for the same reason. It was just too close to the edge for me to do so. I do believe an older reader could handle the less than desirable situations that arise in the book. That is, if they could look at it through the lens of the Bible, not the other way around. Otherwise, the world that Jude longs to be a part of, the darkness that draws her in, might just draw the reader in as well. It's an exciting, daring world. And unless we're able to see the darkness for what it is, it can pull at us too. So, discernment is necessary for this novel. I leave that discernment up to you. Until next time, have a good read. Thanks, readers, for joining us on today's episode. We've got some great books coming up for you. Be sure to stop by randallmurphy.com for more great content, transcripts of the episodes, and upcoming books. We'll be looking at some older series in some upcoming episodes as well. Some honorable mentions include The Cul-de-sac Kids by Beverly Lewis for 6 to 10-year-olds, The Chronicles of Narnia series by C.S. Lewis for 8 to 12, and The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien for 12 to 16. If you would like to suggest a review, you can do so at randallmurphy.com and click Book Reviews at the top of the page. If you like this podcast, please subscribe or follow me, and feel free to leave a review. It helps spread the word about this podcast.